So Andy, I'd always wondered why you were brain dead. Now I know. So I'm glad you recovered. I mean, that's what we think. It's a pleasure to be here today to come back to Oregon. I had been here about over 20 years. Went to Corbin University back in the olden days, and also went on to Western Seminary in Portland. And but it's been many years, so it's great. I was like amazed that it wasn't raining, but in fact, it's a beautiful day. We should thank God for it. So I'll try to keep it short so that we can go out in the sun and enjoy a little bit of it. Traumatic stress reactions. I mean, we call it sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder, or maybe post-traumatic stress. I don't want you to get hung up on those terms, because some are very clinical in their definition, and others are more general. We're going to talk about the more general way of looking at this, because I'm convinced that pastoral caregivers, counselors, are able to make an intervention for those who are suffering from these traumatic stress reactions. You don't have to be a clinician with a PhD or an MD to make an intervention. Now, we know that the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers from Vietnam, you look at the numbers from Afghanistan and Iraq, I mean, according to the VA, maybe upwards to 250,000 and counting have been diagnosed with PTSD. But the numbers are even more than that, because you don't have to have PTSD to have the kind of issues that we're going to talk about this afternoon. And you don't have to have the PhD to make the intervention. How many of you now are veterans who have been downrange here? Anyone is a veteran? Okay, thank you for being here. Some of you are pastors. Anyone here is a counselor or a pastor? Okay, good. So you have to pay attention. There'll be a test at the end. All right, so make sure you stay awake on that. So let's go on. One more thing I got to say, since I'm currently on active duty, everything I have to say here is not from the government. I wanted to say when I came here that I am from the government and I'm here to help you, but that wouldn't be true. Yeah, you heard that before. But this is all my own imagination, based on, one more thing, based on my own experience. I was deployed in Desert Storm, and then I was deployed again in OIF in Iraq back in 2003, 2004. I came in with the 1st Armored Division, served as the 2nd Brigade Chaplain, so I was in the thick of it as a brigade chaplain, but I haven't been back since. A lot of our chaplains and a lot of our soldiers have been back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times. And this just creates more and more problems, because you can't just keep going back to a war zone that is unresolved. And this creates more issues for our volunteer force. So there's this not official presentation. This is my own. Okay, so we got it, especially since we're on camera. Next slide. All right, you can click. All right, you can't see this very well, but this is a picture of Specialist Joseph Dwyer. Specialist Joseph Dwyer served in the 3-7 Cavalry out of Fort Stewart. And this picture is taken about in the spring, I believe, of 2003. During the invasion, 3-7 Cav was probably assigned to the 2nd Brigade, 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, former brigade that I had served. And so here's a picture of him as a medic rescuing a child. The unfortunate thing about this is that in 2008, Joseph succumbed to a drug overdose in North Carolina and lost his life. He lost his life not because he was physically wounded, but because of the problems that he experienced, the moral and spiritual injuries that he experienced in his combat role. And that's what we want to talk about today for a little bit, It's about what some of those injuries are. And then how we can make an intervention to help the people that are in our churches, people in our communities. Because a lot of people across the United States, veterans, active duty military members, all branches, are experiencing these kind of issues to some degree or another. And anyone who's been to combat and comes back and says, nothing's changed, they're just lying. Because combat changes everybody. And in most cases, people come back and they adjust and they move on with their life. Right? You know that's true. But in few instances, when you look at really the hundreds of thousands that have gone forward, a lot of people are still having a lot of problems. And where I'm at Fort Rucker, I work closely with behavioral health. The number one issue, and these are our trainees, so they're excluded, but we have senior pilots who are training our young trainees. Number one issue there is something related to PTSD. So we're trying to get a program there at Fort Rucker to work collaboratively with behavioral health to make an intervention from the chaplain side of the house. Because I would say this, that it's not that the clinicians don't have the answers, it's that it needs to be a full court press. That there are clinical issues, okay, that the clinicians have to address, but what's been left out for many years is that there's a role for us as Christians, and that's what I want to encourage you with, that we can make a difference and we can help out with those who are suffering today. So Dwyer was lost. Unfortunately, this is actually a very famous picture. It was taken by Military Times, so you can easily find it on the internet. But unfortunately, we lost him. We lost him because there were issues that he was trying to medicate himself to deal with the pain. You know, a lot of them will use medications, they'll use alcohol to deal with it. We'll get into some of this. And it didn't work for him. And that's unfortunate. Next slide. All right, it's a complicated slide, but I'm going to explain it for you. So there'll be a quiz on this one here. But let's look over here. You'll see that in combat, or in life, there can be a traumatic event or a series of events or long-term exposure. Long-term exposure in combat will affect people, okay, all kinds of things. Because, you know, I served in Baghdad, and you never knew what was going to happen. I mean, one thing to get mortared and rocketed, okay, I got that. But you never know if you're going to get sniped. Never know if there's an improvised explosive device that's going to be detonated on you. Okay, and that happened to us in our convoy. And then you'd, it's like, wow, it wasn't me, it was the guy behind me. Well, it could have been me. So there's all kinds of things that can play on your mind because of that. Because you're under a heightened sense of awareness and sensitivity, and you become calloused to that reality because you have to do your mission. I remember multiple times getting into a vehicle, and I was there in 2003 and 2004, where we didn't have up-armored vehicles. We just had canvas vehicles. In fact, the doors were removed because it was so stinking hot over there. In August, it was like 130 degrees. So anyway, you just seatbelt yourself in and you tell your driver, go as fast as you can down the road and don't stop for anything. Because back then they were just detonating by hand. Later on, the enemy became more sophisticated and it became more problematic. And in my time, we lost about 26 soldiers in our brigade. And so it was pretty serious. But anyway, there are going to be reactions, and they're going to be physiological, psychological, emotional, and social reactions, also spiritual and moral. Okay, and I'll explain these in a moment. A little bit more over here in terms of of what these mean. I talk about moral because the literature today talks more about moral injury than about spiritual injury. But when I did my research, there wasn't much out there about moral injury. So don't trip over the log, because essentially these are the same. They overlap, but there's a difference, and I'll show you that in a moment. But this is the area that I want to address. This is the area that we can make a difference. Okay? So back to, and all of these reactions really are manifested to some degree over here. All right? Trauma, what is a trauma? Trauma is a wounding, it's an injury. It's a severe stressor that results in a severe stress reaction. It's usually accompanied by fear, a sense of helplessness or horror. We got that. We know what that is. The most common form of trauma in the United States that results in moral and spiritual injury, or ultimately post-traumatic stress or PTSD, is sexual assault. Okay? In combat, there's a whole series of types of traumas: being wounded, almost being wounded, being shot at, watching your friends get killed, watching someone get blown up, looking and seeing dead bodies, these kinds of things. Plus there are other wounds, a sense of betrayal or violations of conscience that occur in the combat zone. Talk a little bit more of that in a moment. But these are traumas that can result in injury of what I call the heart and soul, that require some type of intervention. A lot of these will diminish. Let's say within 90 days, the literature says within, a lot of it will fade. And then the result will be recovery and reintegration. Okay, reintegration is a really big issue in the Army. We want people to go downrange to combat, okay, or over the hill where the gunfire is. Then we want them to come back, and we want them to join their families and move on with their lives, and sometimes very naively, as if nothing really happened. And so that's ridiculous, because everyone has some issue or issues, and it takes a while to reintegrate. It took me a year to reintegrate with my family. I had been gone about 2 years. And I came back to teenagers that didn't want to have anything to do with me, and to a marriage that was a little bit shaky. And we had to move from Florida to Virginia, and my kids didn't want to move. And so they had to move because they couldn't really sustain themselves on their own. We went through a lot. So I tell people, the chaplain's got some challenges here. Don't think that you're exempt, because if we want to be honest about it, we have issues here. So, I don't suffer from PTSD, but I experienced some of these reactions, but over time, they have faded here. So the problem, though, is that some do not. They become chronic. And when they become chronic, they can lead to dysfunction and disintegration. And so we have veterans today and soldiers, service members on active duty who are not integrated. And maybe they're barely functioning. Maybe they're able to get to work, but at night they're doing this. Maybe the marriages are on the rocks. They're not connected to someone or to their community. Now, when I did my research, I went and talked to soldiers of all ranks, from private to general. What was your experience? Okay, I went to many installations, talked to those in the Guard, those in the Reserve, those on active duty, and they were having trouble. And one of the things that was evident was the inability to go back to church. They were believers, but they just couldn't get back into church. They couldn't even go to the mall. They couldn't go shopping because they just couldn't be around people. So we'll talk more on that in a moment. So this is what we're looking at, and we'll drill down, next slide, on what some of this looks like in terms of spiritual and moral injury. So I use the terms a little bit interchangeably, and whether you like moral or spiritual, but I do make a distinction. And where I make the distinction is here, is that really, ultimately, we are spiritual beings. And ultimately, I believe that we are totally integrated as human beings when we are connected to God. And so, everyone is spiritual, but not everyone is totally integrated. In our spirituality, we want to be integrated with God. We want to be integrated with the faith community. We have assumptions about life. We have beliefs and we have values that take us beyond the normal structures of society. Now, we're believers here. Hopefully all of you are. And so we have found meaning in our life because of our spirituality, a spirituality that is based in the Word of God and in the redemption that's through Christ. But there's many others who are spiritual, but they haven't found it through Christ. And they're still searching for meaning and for hope. Okay? But what happens in trauma is that there is an assault on these assumptions. Things become disruptive. If you think about your life as a script, as a narrative or story, then trauma disrupts the story. It throws a monkey wrench into your life story. And those who are not able to fit that in and make sense of it never get beyond that chapter. They get stuck. And that's the problem in severe cases of moral and spiritual injury. They can't get beyond what happened to them. The events of the past occupy their present, and they get stuck. And what we want to do is we want to intervene so that the assumptions about life have an answer. And I'll talk here in a moment about some of these assumptions. For example, a young soldier goes into combat believing that he or she is invulnerable. Even an old soldier like me, I'm a believer. God's got my back. I'm coming back. They're not going to get me. Okay, so we have a sense of invulnerability, that it's not going to happen to me. It's somebody else that's going to get it, not me. And so if I make that assumption and then suddenly it doesn't happen that way, it disrupts my spirituality and I can't make sense of that. Another area is my sense of rationality. If it doesn't make sense for me, then I don't have any meaning assigned to this. Think about the story of Luke 24. What occurs in Luke 24? The road to Emmaus. Jesus has been crucified. He is risen from the dead, but not many know this. So the two disciples are walking down the road. Jesus joins up with them, and he says, hey guys, what's up? And they tell him, well, don't you know? Don't you know? And so he plays dumb, and he explains to them kind of like what he does know. But they did not understand what that was all about until Jesus explained it. I'll show you how that's important in the next slide. Another area where we are affected by trauma is an area of identity. Most of us know who we are, but a young soldier going into combat can be so traumatized by what occurs that he or she loses perspective. They they don't know who they are. Maybe they have done some things, yes. Maybe they have seen some things that they are ashamed of. Maybe they have violated the rules of engagement. Maybe they have killed someone that they thought was a civilian and an innocent person. Or maybe they killed an enemy combatant. I interviewed a veteran who said, I lost some friends in the war. I won't tell you which war it was. And I got mad because my friends were killed. So I made it my mission in life that the first enemy that I saw, that I would engage them with my weapon and take them out. And so he did. He took down 2 enemy combatants that were no threat, but they were wearing the uniform, and so he killed them. Years later, he's telling me that he's a murderer because he had no right to kill them. And no logical argument on my part to explain that in war, people die and the enemy gets it, and it's better for the enemy to die than for you or your friends. None of it mattered to him, because as far as he was concerned, he stepped over a line and he became a murderer. We have soldiers today who are coming back and they believe that they have violated their conscience, that they have broken the sacred law. Killing is not a human thing. Now, you read the news, you think, maybe it is. And violence and all, we're not made that way. And so in war, we're asked to execute violence against the enemy. I just finished a biography of Stonewall Jackson, Civil War general, and he advocated total war from the very beginning. A devout Christian, and yet he said, kill them all. The more the better. End it. Okay. We have soldiers who are suffering from that and many other things, spiritual, moral injury. And so I define for you what is meant by moral injury. I don't want you to get worried about it, because the reality is that both of these type of traumas result in this kind of symptomology: guilt and shame and anger, grief, many losses, loss of meaning and hope and peace. And we've got to do something about it. Alienation, not only alienation from God, but alienation from one another. Men come back. They can't be intimate with their wife because they just can't. They got a weapon under the pillow. In extreme cases, they still are back there, and they're out there checking the perimeter in their yard. I came back with this obsessive compulsiveness about me that I've always got to check and make sure I got my wallet and my stuff. And my wife says, "You've changed. You're like OCD." I said, "Blame it on the war." I said, I just got to keep track of my stuff, because if I don't have my stuff, I'm in trouble. So, probably Jonathan Shea should be attributed to identifying what moral injury is, violations of conscience, a sense of betrayal. I talked to a soldier who was assigned to a unit, and he came back with a lot of anger, which, by the way, is very common. Almost everybody who comes back is angry. I was angry. I don't even know what, but I was angry. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of sleeplessness, a lot of irritability, and they go together. So this soldier says, Chaplain, it's not that anybody was trying to kill me. It's just that my own leadership betrayed me. They didn't follow through. They didn't hold up their end of the bargain. And so I'm angry. And I can't reconcile that. So we got soldiers going through that kind of thing. Shea, in the book Achilles in Vietnam, it's a great book, identifies these issues, particularly for the Vietnam War, because there was a lot of disparity and the way troops were treated. Some of you may be Vietnam veterans, and you can attest to it. Loss of faith. Roger Benhamhoff was a chaplain in Iraq, and you can look him up on the internet. And it was a Newsweek article on him, but he lost his faith in God. He couldn't reconcile what he was experiencing, the losses of his soldiers, which for chaplains is painful. You know, when you have to handle remains, when you have to move people, and you're there, and one day you're with these young guys, and the next day, you know, they're in the morgue, or you watch them dying in front of you. These are hard things for us, and it affects you. I was sharing with a friend of mine yesterday how that even the report of the death of a soldier touches me deeply because of the grief that I carry for the soldiers that we lost over in Iraq. And leaders experience this as well. So grief is a really big deal for us. For veterans, the grief is complicated. It's not like other kinds of grief because there's many other issues associated with the grief. There's guilt and there's shame, often associated. They go together. I interviewed a soldier who said to me, he was severely wounded. He was going to be medically boarded from the Army. He said, the thing that gets me is not this, but the loss of my soldiers. They were killed, and I wasn't there to save them, and I could have helped them. And he suffered grief and guilt, false guilt, survivor's guilt. I made it, they didn't. I got out of it, they didn't. And so there's a lot of that. Those of you who are veterans, you know the bond of comradeship that exists. Okay, we don't share that with others. We don't even explain it. And yet there is that. I know that the soldiers just go through a difficult, very, very difficult time with all of this. And it's not only complicated because there's so many other issues associated, but it's what we call disenfranchised. And that is that it's a grief that we don't share with others. The kind of experience that we had is ours. It's not the same as others. And there's no one to talk to about it. Veterans will talk to veterans, but they're not going to go to Pastor Jones, who's never been to war, and pour out their heart about the young soldier that they lost. I had a sergeant come to me when I was over there, and he lost like lieutenant and 2 of his soldiers, and then again it was repeated, and he was beside himself telling me, I don't know what the heck to do, because they're becoming more sophisticated in the way they're planting their devices, and we don't know how to fight against that. And he felt terribly responsible for the loss of these soldiers. And it's true. And so that's what our soldiers are going through. Various losses. I believe that in particular, the loss of meaning is powerful, because if we don't know what the trauma means in my life, why is my script so disrupted that I can't move on with my life, and we don't know what it meant and why God allowed it, then we've got to address it. We've got to figure it out. Some of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Man's Search for Meaning. His book is helpful because there he was in Auschwitz, and he observed people whose only hope was to escape the horror of Auschwitz. And he said, no, you may not escape. So does that mean that there's no meaning in the suffering? There must be meaning in the suffering today. Because if you can find meaning in the suffering, then you can move on with your life and you can say, whether I survive Auschwitz or not, my life mattered. My life counted for something. And so this is what is so relevant to our soldiers today, is that they got to be able to look at their experience in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they got to be able to say, it mattered. It made a difference. The loss that I experienced, whether it was personal or whether it was a loss of friends, loss of life, loss of limb, sacrifice, whatever it might be, it mattered. And we have to help people find that meaning. Going back again to Luke 24, in Luke 24, Jesus says that the crucifixion, that traumatic experience, you think those disciples were traumatized when he died on Calvary? You bet they were. What the heck is going on here? The King of the Jews, the Savior of the world, he's dead? I don't get it. And yet Jesus explained that it was all part of the plan, right? And so we're here today and say it wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph. And so our soldiers need to look at their trauma and say, there is meaning in it. There's meaning in it. How many of you are familiar with Mitch Albom's book, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven? Maybe you've read the book or seen the movie. It's a great movie, great book, because there's there's one of the 5 people that the character meets is a commander that was killed in a terrible battle. And so Eddie, the main character, arrives after death, okay, and he's on this battlefield, and it's like, man, you know, you died here, and I survived. He says, yeah, I died, and, you know, some give all and some give some, you know. But you got angry over your loss, because Eddie had a limp, couldn't get on with things. You know, his dreams were shattered. And he said, yeah, but, you know, your remains are all over the place. He said, yeah, but you got to understand something. There's meaning in this. And the meaning is that there's meaning in sacrifice. And to sacrifice for others is a human thing. It's a noble thing. It's powerful. Powerful. I use a clip from that scene in my program to show soldiers that there's meaning in what they sacrificed. Every soldier sacrifices, particularly those who are suffering from moral and spiritual trauma. They sacrificed, and they continue to sacrifice. They need to know that every bit of it has meaning and is worthwhile. You know, we might not understand all of it, but there is meaning in it. Let's move on to the next slide. So I create a little chart, help you understand how we can intervene. So you begin to the left side here. There's reconstruction. And I'll let you look at it and I'll just kind of talk about it. Reconstruction of the narrative of the trauma. It's nothing more than a form of critical incident debriefing. It's a way of going back and saying, okay, what really did happen? Where were you? What did you do? Where were the others? See, the problem is that for a lot of soldiers, they are reacting to what they thought happened versus what really happened. And so you've got to reconstruct the narrative. You've got to help people understand what really occurred. And we know if we just go back to that trauma, it's a form of exposure therapy, that it can be traumatic for them again, because you're asking them to relive that attack. You're asking them to relive those scenes of grief and those memorials. But you must do that in order for them to identify the facts and to connect their thoughts and their feelings to their actions appropriately. What really happened? See, the problem is that as time goes by and they keep on reliving the past, that it gets distorted. And we don't want them to relive the past. We want them to remember it and honor it. But they're stuck, and so they're reliving it. And so a sight or sound or smell, gunfire over there can trigger a reaction. And they're back right there again where they've always been. And they never get beyond in their life. They're just become, in worst case, dysfunctional. Now let me say this. As we look at moral and spiritual injury, I'm not saying that these symptoms equate to PTSD. PTSD is a severe form of post-trauma that meets very specific clinical criteria. But I'm also saying that moral and spiritual injury may be included in PTSD, but does not equate to it. It's that spectrum of symptomology that exists out there. So in case I wasn't making that clear, I want to go back to saying that. In the next section, we're asking you to reframe the trauma narrative. We reframe when we introduce new information to the narrative. Okay? If you think about a script and the dots don't connect, then there's no meaning, right? Words are missing, so you've got to insert some words to explain the narrative so that it's meaningful. In Luke 24, Jesus inserts the words into the narrative. And, right, we would like to have read all of what he gave them, right? He tells them from the beginning what the prophets had said, right? I don't have time to go back and look at it, but believe me, it's in Luke 24. So there, he connects the dots for them, brings new information into the narrative, and they're able to make sense of it. And when it's reframed like that, what we mean is that the perspective changes. The picture enlarges so that it needs a bigger frame to put around it. Okay? And it gives a person hope for the future. And very quickly, and I'll answer questions at the end, the third aspect to intervention is ritual. Ritual. Ritual is a powerful thing to help people who feel dirty because of their combat experience. They feel dirty because essentially maybe the things that they did are perceived as sin or in fact were sin. What does David say in Psalm 51? He says, cleanse me, and renew me. Cleanse me with a hyssop. Renew me, wash me, and I will be clean. Why? Because veterans want to be clean. And when we're clean, we can move forward with our lives, right? We can go forward. So these things are my own, and others are doing some work in this area. But these themes are based in part on cognitive behavioral therapy that basically says if we think about things in a certain way, then we're going to feel a certain way, and we're going to act in a certain way. So if I tell you right now that gunfire over there is not a range, but we're under attack, you're going to have an emotional reaction if you believe me, because you're not going to believe me, because it's stopped right now, isn't it? But if I tell you the place is on fire, you're going to have an emotional reaction, because your mind is informing your emotions, and then you're going to act in a certain way. So what we're saying in this, that we reconstruct the narrative, we reframe it by the introduction of new information that's biblical. In Corinthians, I think it's 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about the thorn in the flesh. And he says, Lord, I don't need this. And he goes to the Lord 3 times about it. And finally the Lord says, You're stuck, man. This is the plan. And what does Paul say? He says, okay, then it's okay because I am strong in my weakness. By my weakness, I will find strength in God. And what did Jesus say? God said, my grace is sufficient. There's the new information. And so he was able to move on because he found meaning in his thorn in the flesh, whatever it was. And he was able to go forward in his life. In the book of Job, he had 3 people come along and say, let's reconstruct the narrative, Job. But you know what? None of them had it right. It was God that came along and said, I'll reconstruct the narrative. And so Job was able to move on with his life because God reframed it for him, and he was able to move forward. In Psalm 73, Asaph looks at the people around him and he says, Lord, I'm a good guy. I've done your will. I follow your word. And I'm struggling. But these people are wicked and they're prosperous and they have no problems and no pain. So it's incongruent. It doesn't make sense. I don't get it. In fact, I'm about lost my faith over this. This is my paraphrase. But it's all there, believe me. It's there in 73. So then, as you read through the narrative, you see that he says, and then I came into the sanctuary of the Lord, and then I understood. So God revealed himself to him in a powerful way. And so Asaph concludes, and he says, I got it. And I can move on with my life because the Lord is my portion and heritage. What happened to him? He understood their end. He understood that, yeah, they might do okay now, but they will perish. And it may be difficult for me as a believer, but I belong to God, and God will ultimately take care of me. Same narrative is found in Lamentations 3. Go back to Lamentations 3, and you'll see the same thing. All of this, then a shift. And the shift is a reframing of the narrative so that the writer is able to say, I can move on in my life. So let's go to the next slide. All right, real quick. I want to give you some practical suggestions. And I'll just let you read those there for a moment. One of the things I want to say is that people who go to combat and those who are intervening for those who have been in combat have to have a theology of suffering, a theological perspective that accounts for wholesale violence. War is not a good thing, but it happens. It happens, right? So if you don't have a theology that accounts for war, and by the way, the Bible has a lot about war. You know, God is a warrior, so you got to get that. You have to understand that. And so for me, I understood that. I understood that body parts can be strewn all over the pavement and that innocent people can die and children die and all of this. That is the horror of war, and we need to avoid that as much as possible. I got that. But if you don't have that, then you can't really make much of an intervention here. Safety and security and trust are very important for those who you are intervening for and helping. If you don't have that for them, they're not going to open up for you. So just some suggestions here. I want to give time for some questions here. But it's better to be calm, better not to react, better to create a really secure environment for people. Remember, it's not about you. It's not about your need to be the hero. It's about them and what they need. And they're not necessarily going to tell their story to you. So you have to be respectful of their privacy. Next slide. A couple of other counseling issues here. And we'll make these slides available to you. The only thing I would ask is that you don't make them your own. or brief them as your own. But you certainly can use them. Just give credit and blame to me. Next slide, please. All right, some practical issues here. I already alluded to some of these, but very important to ask. People tell me all the time when they find out that I serve, thank you for your service. Okay, I got that, I appreciate that. Okay, but that doesn't go well for those who are morally and spiritually injured. That doesn't go well. Because, you know, they want to say to you, you have no idea what I did. And I'm not thankful for what I did. And so, be careful about that. Okay, I know what you mean. I know that you care. I appreciate that, and I do. But those who are hurting do not feel that way about their service. They're not thankful for it. So be respectful, ask permission, do not intrude. Don't say, hey, you're coming home, we're going to have a big party. You have no idea of what that might happen to them as a result of that. But so you really got to be careful about what's going on over there and with them. And do what you say. But most of all, just respond to them. And how can I help? You know? So, anyway, I appreciate your attentiveness today. And so if we have some time for some questions, I'll open it up for that. No questions? Yes? And so we've identified it as a moral injury, okay? And what I'm telling you is, and what I have, there's no simple answer to that, because this is not the first time that I've heard these kinds of things. I mean, what do you do? Another example might be, do I shoot this person who obviously has been strapped with a bomb? It's a child, or do I let them blow us all up? And what do I do? I had a soldier tell me, they told us don't stop for anything. Well, the kids were running in front of us. Well, what were you doing? This interview I did. I ran over them. I said, you what? You ran over them? Yes. So,
Bill and I, we just said, we gave her a hug and we said, we need the Lord.
Yeah.
All that we were equipped to do.
Right, because there's no rational, logical argument that you can make. I mean, when I tried to make the argument that killing a combatant in war was legitimate, and adhered to the rules of engagement, that didn't work either. So given that, because the enemy that we're dealing with, they are brutal, okay? And so they're barbaric. And so they'll do those kinds of things. They don't care about life. And so love and compassion and trust and acceptance, because at a level it wasn't her fault, okay? She didn't put those kids there, but that's not something easily assuaged. The guilt doesn't easily go away. But you're right about the answer with with God there is a way. We must believe that. So I believe that, our program, I really appreciate your comment. Our program is 16 weeks, and we use video, and we use a group methodology, and any of you are welcome to it. I have the information, the guide. I wrote the guide so that you can see how it is. But if you understand the concepts, and that's why I wrote the book, to lay out all the concepts, and then the guide is there, the program is there, so that soldiers can go through this in little bitty steps, so that they come to a realization through an interaction with one another, and you're stimulating them with questions, and with the help of the Holy Spirit, they're able to come to some reconciliation, because that's what she needs. She needs to be able to reconcile that incongruity, because that's not supposed to happen. Not supposed to happen, but it does. Other questions, comments that you want to make here? Yes, sir.
In a broader sense, I was just curious, because it sounds like you're still developing some of this somewhat. Do you feel that there's more spiritual trauma coming about because of, let's say, improper doctrine that was taught, pie in the sky religion, that these kids are going to war and seeing this, like you said, with the thought that they'd be okay no matter what? They were told that everything's going to be great, you're in the hands of the Lord. But they bring that into the physical sense rather than remaining in the spiritual sense. Do you think that that's an issue that you could add on to your teaching?
No, I don't think there's anything new. I think it's always been there. It depends, but some years ago, Bob Hicks, I don't know if you know Bob Hicks, but he developed this concept of the circle of assumptions. And what Bob did was he said in this quadrant of areas where things are irrational, things are where we feel invulnerable, or there's a loss of identity, or justice and morality. It was a nice way of looking at how we are vulnerable. So good theology, a good theology of suffering, will enable someone to be more battle-proof than others who say, like Asaph, God loves me and will never let anything bad happen to me. Well, it just doesn't work out that way, does it? That bad things do happen to innocent, godly, loving people. So, but my stuff is all done. We're just trying to implement it at Fort Rucker. But can always be developed even further. But I latched on to the spiritual trauma because I wanted to be able to show that for every spiritual trauma, there's a spiritual answer. So for moral trauma, the issue is over a moral authority that could be God, maybe not. We have soldiers going into combat who have some form of morality, but it's not biblical. It's some other kind of morality. Whatever that is, they can still suffer from a moral trauma because they've violated their moral code. So that's a good point, but it's pretty much, I haven't seen anything that tells me that's any different. I think it's always been that way. Yes, sir.
Sir, curious, Oregon is one of two states that initially received a grant to integrate faith-based services into our veterans reintegration programs. Oregon Returning Veterans Project is one of those. I'm wondering, being still engaged in the active community, are you aware of at least on the federal level, them embracing more of us as pastoral caregivers, counselors in that faith-based community, reaching out to our armed services personnel?
I'm aware of it, but I've not seen anything that's really making a difference. A friend of mine is doing some work in a program called youtransform.org. His name is Robert Vera. Robert Vera just came out with a book called A Warrior's Faith. And he's been engaged and he's working with people at governmental levels and at educational levels. But basically the same thing. We can do a faith-based intervention. But I'm not aware of much else. Haven't seen much else, but a lot more has come out. So I think I'm out of time.